Hello my friends, we are at episode 38 of Just Return, and we left off with the village headman way up the Amazon sending somebody off to fetch a boy who might know something that could help both Stephen and Christine and the others to find Belinda. Hermes explains that he sent the boy to fetch the man who gave Carla a photograph months before. When the young man arrives, Carla, using the native tongue, asks him where he got it. The young man looks at the white faces and says something to Carla. Stephen and Christine, along with Hermes, do not understand what he's saying until all is explained later. So they're surprised when the village elder shouts angrily at the young man. Looking embarrassed rather than offended, the young man explains to Carla, waving his arms and pointing to the river. Back at the boat, Carla explains that the young man wanted payment for the information, not money, but some kind of payment. The village elder was angry because Carla had been a friend to the village, trading with them for years and often bringing gifts. Up early again the next morning, Carla and Stephen carry some boxes of canned beans to the main lodge where many of the families sleep, leaving the beans at the entrance. Some of the men are already hunting, but the children and the women wave back to the travellers as the boat once more purs its way up the river. Stephen and Christine both yell "wow" as a flock of very brightly coloured birds with harsh calls fly across the boat and down the river. The calls of monkeys, birds and the denseness of the forest make Stephen and Christine feel they've entered a different world again, denser and darker and yet more beautiful. And the next stop adds to that feeling that they're now in a different time almost. At this point, Curler turned the boat into a narrow tributary. He knew the first few kilometres of this stretch. He also knew the village that he'd been directed to, and he knew that his boat could go that far, so he decided to press on until nightfall or until they reached the village. It was still fairly late when they arrived at the small village just a few hundred yards from the river, but on higher ground. There were just 6 thatched buildings here. The sound of the riverboat turning and drawing close to the bank caught the attention of some of the men who had just returned from a hunting trip, or some women who were weaving. The men unloaded their booty from the hut, but they didn't take too much notice, and they didn't unload the weapons. The people here wore very little by way of clothing, just a kind of loincloth was all that covered the men. The leader of the younger men was carrying a palm bow, and he attached a long arrow to it. The 8 other men also did the same, but one chose instead to prepare his blowpipe for use. Christine and Stephen were not too scared, but totally fascinated by the men as they made their way toward them. The women who stood at the top of the hill pushed the smaller children behind them. They too were fascinated, but again their fascination was mixed with some fear. The men had seen more riverboats than the women as they traded down the river, and with a tribe further down the river there was often riverboats. The women, however, had only ever been to a neighbouring village for an occasional festival, and the younger ones had rarely seen white people. Carla told Hermes that once the boat was tied he would get out. Hermes and Stephen were to fetch some boxes of fruit from the hold of the boat and to unload them. They were to follow him up the hill. Christine, he said, should stay on the boat, but then he laughed and said, "But she won't, so tell her to walk up the hill, but behind you." Carla jumped onto the shore and fastened a second rope to the exposed roots of a very old tree, smiling broadly and waving his hands to show he had no concealed weapons. He called out a greeting. It was in the language of another tribe, but he thought the men here might know it. Maybe they did, but the expressionless faces made no response except that they continued walking with bows ready for use. Hermes jumped onto the shore and Stephen passed him both boxes of fruit. Stephen smiled as he joined him on the riverbank. "Here we are coming with fruit as if we were visiting the sick in Southampton General Hospital, and yet we're facing armed men and might be perceived as invaders," he thought. As the 2 men followed Carla up the hill, Christine left the boat and prayed silently that nobody was going to get hurt here. Still smiling and with arms and hands outstretched, Carla stopped when he and the men met halfway up the hill. He was trying to present himself and his companions as a friendly party. He did not know these people. The man who was closest to him stared at him and with for an Amazonian native, a look of real contempt. Carla had been around the Amazon for long enough to know that if there was anger here, somewhere along their line of history, white men had probably caused it. The man in front of him was a magnificent human. He had a long black hair swept back from his forehead and tied with beads and bright red and green feathers. Though he was wearing very little in the way of clothing, he had many necklaces and bracelets, mostly of beads, but some metal also. He was a strong man, and his look was one of a look of one who was not afraid. He was alert, wary, and concerned for the welfare of his family and the tribe. The arrows he carried under one arm were long, and the bow was similar to an English longbow. He stared into Carla's face and stood his ground. Carla smiled and stood his ground also. Then he called Stephen and Hermes forward and told them to place the fruit boxes near to the leader of the native men. When they did this, Carla signalled that they were for his people. Without changing his expression, the leader spoke to his companions, and two of them came forward and took the fruit up the hill. Still the leader and the other men stood still and watched. The tribal women, though interested in the fruit, did not take their eyes off the scene. After the standoff, which lasted another 10 minutes, which Carla found intimidating but knew he had to just sit out, the leader signalled for them to come into the village. And as they followed the leader up the hill, the other bows, still loaded, followed behind. Christine was totally fascinated by it all and was a little fearful. Stephen gave her a glance, and her smile impressed on him that she would always be a good woman in a crisis. Carla talked, and Hermes told Christine to show the leader the photo. They stood outside one of the thatched huts, the largest one. The women and children had gathered around to see the strange aliens. Christine took from her shoulder bag the photograph of her beloved daughter and the unknown older man with her. The leader took it from Christine in a snatch, looked at it, still no change of expression. Stephen thinks, he's worse than the car salesman I know in Southampton. He looked at the picture, then at Christine, said something in an unknown language and handed the photo back. However, Christine caught the eye of a friendly-faced Indian woman to her left, holding on to a toddler. She smiled and the woman smiled back. Pointing at the toddler, she made gestures as if she was nursing a baby and then pointed at the woman. Now several women are smiling. Christine then points at herself, then made the baby nursing gesture again, then pointed at the photo and again to herself. Now the women start talking excitedly. Christine continues to gesture as if searching for something, then points at the photo and then at herself and repeats the baby nursing, rocking her arms as if holding a little one. One of the other women, who has a baby on her back, thinks she understands. Pointing at the picture, she then touches Christine and the picture. Christine nods her head and gives the woman a broad smile and touches her arm. The woman turns to the leader and says something that only the Indians can follow. At last, the leader's face changes. He relaxes and invites the visitors into his hut, one that is shared with several others, mostly connected by family ties. He sits on the floor and the visitors join him. The other men soon join them, but now they have no weapons, and soon food and drink are being brought. Christine and Stephen do not have a clue what they're eating, but they enjoy it and also enjoy the now friendly gestures and faces of the villagers. They're a little worried though that now they're accepted as friends, their reason for being there will not be considered. About 2 hours pass before Christine sees that her fears are unfounded. The leader holds out his hand to Christine when a couple of younger men arrive. She holds her hand out to him and he's amused, but he now imitates the baby nursing gesture and she understands that he really wants a picture of her baby. Holding it in one hand and a burning stick in the other, he shows the young men. They become excited and it's obvious they recognise the photo. Christine does not know if that is because it passed through their hands, but hopes so. It would be even better if they knew where Belinda was. There is much excited conversation between men of the village. One of them at the end steps forward and hands the photo to Christine. He then says, "Amana." Carla and Hermes are delighted. He has used the Portuguese Brazilian word for tomorrow. Hermes explains that to Stephen and Christine. They're all taken to a hut where they can sleep. Christine is taken by the women to a place where they can wash and she joins in with the women and children. She finds this a little embarrassing but knows she must behave as they do to be accepted. Afterwards, one of the young mothers works at Christine's hair and puts some beautiful green wooden beads into it. Christine, for her part, removes A not very expensive silver bracelet she once brought herself and puts it on the woman's wrist, where she already has beads and bangles. The two women smile at each other and know they are sisters even though half a world divides them. So, are they getting near to Belle? Are they going to find her? It's looking more like that, isn't it, my friends? The next episode will reveal some more. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye. Bye.